please a warm welcome to Brock Pierce.
Hello. Good evening. Second, I guess, talk today. Some of you, I think, saw me this morning at 8, and I go from here to do a third tonight. And then right out of Miami for tomorrow afternoon. We can skip that. My background is, I've been playing with digital currencies since the late 90s, specifically with games like World of Warcraft and Second Life. I was the main market maker for the digital currency in those games. In my early 20s, I built up a supply chain of 400,000 people in China that were playing these games to mine the digital currencies. And what you'll learn is that the great engineers and cryptographers and such are the ones that built the technology, but South Korea is the largest market in the world with a small population because gamers are driving adoption this time more so than porn. Here's a little film that the trailer came out late last year that we made back in like 8 years ago. I forgot it was being made, called Play Money.
I struggled for years trying to explain what it was I was doing.
Usually I just say I work with video games, because if I say, I'm a virtual currency broker, people just kind of look at you like, what?
You've got games that are based entirely on selling gold on Facebook. Virtual worlds are creating demands, and somebody's going to have to meet those demands. If they don't, somebody like me will.
It was at that time that I realized that people will spend money on virtual things no differently than they would for tangible things. That was kind of that eureka moment for me. And that's really when my company was on its way to doing $100 million in revenue.
And they said, so what you got to do, you got to take all the profit we've made, and you got to give it to us, or we're going to sue you tomorrow. This is going to end badly. Oh.
And there are a lot of people who hate what we do.
Business versus family. I didn't do well.
This is the future of the video game industry.
And this has happened on a massive scale in countries like China.
比如说当他们问的时候呢，他们现在休息以后，他们没有底薪的。
The real and the virtual starts to blend together.
But I always looked at this as something that could go poof instantly.
Yeah, so this film, I guess, is coming out this year. But it's an interesting thing to study. The people that have been working in virtual worlds and reading science fiction novels, are kind of best equipped to understand this. So what's going on? I don't know if anyone's familiar with this concept of the starfish and the spider, but if you cut the leg off a spider, does anyone know what happens? It walks with a limp. A second leg, more of a limp, its head is dead. But with the starfish, if you cut that leg off, it grows back. If you cut off any part of that leg with the center of the starfish, it grows into a new starfish. If you cut it 5 ways through the center here, it'll become 5 starfish. And so this is the best book that basically talks about decentralization, and in this case, it's the best example of decentralization occurring in nature. And so the world is moving away from centralized systems to decentralized and distributed systems. But that's not the only sort of trend that's driving all of this. How many of you know what the Byzantine general's problem is? So the question you'd ask is why now? The idea of creating called a peer-to-peer payment system has been around since the beginning of the internet. The problem is this Byzantine general's problem that's better thought of as a double spend no one had been able to solve. And that is, if I was going to send you an email and attach a picture or cash, as the case may be, how do you know when you receive that email that I didn't keep a copy for myself or send it to a number of other people? All of the protocols that make up the internet today aren't able to solve for that. So if you were studying for your PhD in cryptography, math, computer science, there's a good chance that you looked at solving this problem, and no one was able to solve it until Bitcoin. Bitcoin was the first blockchain that solved this problem, and it wasn't by creating any new technologies. It was just taking existing technologies and putting them together in the right way and then building the incentivization model that drove it. And now we've been through this first sort of period of kind of working through the kinks, lots of development. It's complicated stuff because the internet today is broken. And it's more or less always been broken. When the internet was first being sort of architected through the 70s and 80s, the problem we had is we didn't have the computer processing capability to put in place the encryption that we knew was necessary. And so security was something we just kind of had to live without at first. But what happened is, as we were laying the foundation of the internet, we started putting in place protocols, and then we started building things on top of it. And by the time we got the processing power necessary to encrypt it and secure it, it was kind of too late, and we just kept building. And we kept building and building and building, and the internet is broken. The information superhighway, which you could think of as a data transport protocol, is an insecure data transport protocol. And what the blockchain is doing is it's bringing security. It's turning the internet into a secure data transport protocol, which means everything on the internet today is going to disappear. Basically, there's a new internet launching, and everything's going to get rebuilt. And we can do a lot more now that we have security. Historically, we've only been able to use the internet for information. And anything of value we put on it, tends to be at high risk. Once the internet's been secured, the amount of things that we can do are going to, everything goes exponential. The impact the internet had in the world is going to be very small in comparison. And all we've been waiting for is the first blockchain that is able to deliver at scale and doesn't have friction for users to access it, kind of like Steam it. You don't have to own any tokens to access that service. It's not a website, though you wouldn't know that by looking at it. It's a block explorer. And so websites are going away. There won't be websites. They'll look like websites, they're just not going to be websites anymore. And so it's time to start thinking about, Facebook, Google, everything's up for grabs. Uber. And so the other things that are driving this is open source. We're moving away from a world of proprietary software to an open source one. We've known for a long time that open source was a superior model, but why, if it's so superior, is it taking so long to take off? It's because it was voluntary. You didn't get paid. You did this because you wanted some social credit. You wanted to do something cool, or you philosophically believed in a project and you wanted to contribute to it. But when there's a problem, who fixes it? It's a voluntary system. People have to make money. And what the beauty of what the blockchain has done to this is the tokenization model is allowing you to essentially own equity in protocols. Imagine if you could have owned equity in TCP or IP or FTP or HTTP or any of the protocols. So what happens is when you've added the economic incentive to the open source movement, you've now given it the ability to go exponential, and we're going to open source the entire world. Because today, you'll make more money working on open source projects than you will working at Google or Facebook. The incentive matters. It gets things done quickly. And so open source is where we're moving. We're going from owning proprietary hardware to shared assets. We're seeing that all over the place, and the world is going from centralized to decentralized. And these are kind of the three major trends that are driving a lot of these things right now. I don't need to tell you about this, but Bitcoin is the fastest growing bank in the world, but has no employees or branches, like these other examples. These things are worth noting, because most people don't know what money is, but this is just a list of currencies, the world reserve sort of currencies, and how they've changed, roughly every 100 years. It's been a pretty consistent pattern. This is an interesting one when you just think about if you took all your money today, you put it in the bank as cash, and you had yourself frozen for 100 years and brought back, you'd come back broke. And that's because of fractional reserve lending going off the gold standard, but right now it's quantitative easing. What's happening is your real estate's not really appreciating in value. It's that everything else is just going down. Because imagine if you know startups, imagine if you were an investor in a company, a minority shareholder, but where management was able just to continue to dilute you every day until you had nothing. And that's essentially what's going on. Forking is worth talking about because we've gone from, last year was all about forks, at least the end of the year. And we're probably going to see more of that, and that's actually a good thing. All of you are forks. Forks of your parents' DNA. Consensual, I hope. But you have, contentious forks as well. And these things are natural. This is how evolution works. And sometimes old systems go away if they can't reach consensus. and that's progress. So if you don't know, what the winner is in any of these situations, I'd recommend you hold both. This mentality like, oh, you're just getting free tokens. The reality is one of those forks could end up being the winner. Because the beauty of this open source system with this type of governance, because the blockchain is a governance system, and it's really a voting mechanism to provide for peer-to-peer governance, liquid democracy. And then you can just build all sorts of interesting things on top of it. But what happens is if someone owns too much of a system, it forks to dilute them. If leadership in one of these systems is failing to lead well, they're replaced instantly. It becomes sort of an incorruptible system. I like to think of the blockchain as something that brings light, immutability, and transparency to the world. What's going on in the market today? You're starting to see real adoption, both in the developing world as well as the developed world. Developing, it's more the consumer end of things, and on the developed, it's more on the commercial end of things. So why is that? You've got 3 billion people on the planet that don't have any financial services whatsoever. Another 2 to 3 billion people with limited access to financial services. This is in Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa. So in the same way that Africa leapfrogged wired telecommunication and went straight to wireless, this is a system that, for these people, is going to democratize the global financial system in a way where every human being on the planet is going to have equal access. And it's the least fortunate billions that are going to benefit the most. And that's because Bitcoin today is really more like gold 2.0. I don't know if you followed, but one of the biggest sort of naysayers for some time was Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan. Last week he just said, oops, I was wrong about Bitcoin. At that same time as when Goldman Sachs said that Bitcoin might be a better store of value than gold. That was an interesting day. A couple of major financial institutions. So yeah, you've got on the consumer side other things like hyperinflation. Places like Argentina, the economy collapses all the time. You wake up one day and your bank account just says zero. That happens all around the world. As Americans, we tend to take a lot of this stuff for granted. Interesting stuff in Cyprus. The most advanced payment market in the world is Kenya, where over 80% of payments are done with mobile phones using non-government money, using prepaid cell phone minutes, called M-Pesa. All sorts of crazy stuff in India, currency control laws, et cetera, et cetera. You have the consumer adoption is happening. I'm seeing in the developing world. The numbers are picking up, and not just there, you're seeing it here too. I mean, obviously, people are waking up and getting involved. But all the banks have been coming on board, and that's just continued to accelerate and accelerate. The banks are seeing this, and that's really not a bad thing. A bunch of people are like, Brock, why have you always been educating the banks? I go, well, if you really want to change the system, you don't really do that by throwing stones from the outside. You change the system from the inside. And that is working with the incumbents and explaining to them that, yes, some parts of this are going to be bad for your business, and some parts of this are going to be good for your business. Clearing banking, correspondent banking is probably going away. But in the same way that voice over IP, reduced costs and created great efficiency for the telecom industry, this is going to create great efficiency for the banking industry, at least in the innovator's dilemma perspective. The spoils will go to those that act quickly. And bankers are not like the music industry of the 90s. They're actually pretty smart and they're greedy. So anyway, that's all kind of coming together. It's a global phenomenon. This is, I think, really important because of capital formation. Entrepreneurs that were on the west coast of the United States had a huge advantage over everyone else in the world. They had access to capital. If you were born in many parts of the world and you were the next Zuckerberg or whomever it might be, the odds of you building your business were nearly zero. What's happening is capital formation is changing, and this is happening through the things we'll talk about next. But entrepreneurs anywhere in the world are going to have equal access, which I think is a wonderful thing. All the VCs are in. This is kind of interesting in the sense that the sector took in 2014 almost as much money as the internet did in 95, and 2015 as much as the internet in 96, but it doesn't cost $5 million to build a website to sell shoes anymore. You can do it for 50 grand. Actually, you can build a community for free probably. But what happened is the VCs stopped putting more money in 2016 because they kept asking guys like me, where are the exits? Where are the exits? Where are the revenue? Where's the revenue? Yeah, we already have one investment. Let me know when there's an exit. So what happened is the entrepreneurs kept flooding in, and the quality of them kept getting better, and that's why the ICO took off. I'm one of the founding board members of Mastercoin. We invented the ICO. We did the first ICO in June of 2013, but in 2016, entrepreneurs started doing this, but it was normally the entrepreneurs that couldn't raise money from the VCs. It was kind of the path of last resort, or because you had strong philosophical reasons that this was the right model, like Ethereum. Clearly, they could have raised money from anyone. But one really interesting thing happened. There was this thing called the DAO, which was the best example of what not to do from a security auditing perspective. But what it did do is it showed that this model can scale. It raised $150 million to basically decentralize venture capital. And what that would say to any great entrepreneur is, wait, this isn't a secondary sort of path for financing or a source of getting the resources to do what I want to do. This might be better than venture capital. Actually, why would I want venture capital when I can do this? And so that's the message that was heard, which is what resulted in what happened last year. ICOs took in $4.3 billion and continuing to ramp rapidly. It's now outpacing venture capital at the early stage by 4x. Blockchain financings are, basically taking over venture. All these Series B, C, late stage growth funds are going to be as bad as the 2000 vintage of the internet, because there will be no more unicorns. Their business models depend on unicorns. The best deals, the deals that make or break a fund, are not going to take venture capital. Maybe the seed stage stuff, but by a Series B, it's done. So these late stage funds with $1 billion, $2 billion, I mean, get out. I did also last year the first tokenization of a security, and that's because a lot of this stuff is being done as utility tokens, and I don't think that was the right model. It is in some cases, but not all cases. What you're building in this space is communities, and you should always ask yourself what is best for my community first, and if you always operate from that perspective, you will always do the right thing. Don't put yourself first. And so I wanted to show the market that you don't have to do this as a utility token. It was obvious to me that some of these things were being done a while, and a lot of them were being structured as utility tokens to circumvent securities law. That's not going to end well. And also you need to do the best architecture for your users. You're building an inferior product in many cases. So I wanted to show people that you can tokenize a security, and did that using regulation DNS, and did that out of Singapore, but raised our third fund, and I think it was like 16 minutes from 80 countries, 800 people, and it was completely democratized. So historically, venture capital has only been available to the financial elite. Now it's available to anyone, and it's also liquid. Like a public stock, it trades the token. So liquidity, or the lack thereof, democratization, or an exclusive thing. How do you think that story is going to end? I said, when I did this, I said venture capital's dead, and I quit being a VC. I went to go join Brendan, a bunch of other people to help start EOS. So the question is, are we in a bubble? Most certainly. There's lots of bubbles. Bubbles are normal. The price is the primary barometer of sentiment. It doesn't always track fundamentals. It's emotional. We don't live in efficient markets. And so, yeah, of course, but the question is, there's lots of other bubbles. What about fiat money? Bonds? Stock market? Those are the bubbles that actually worry me. So let's put it into perspective. During the internet, the tech stocks got to a height of 7 trillion. That's when it was only a Western phenomenon, and that's not inflation adjusted. I think I can make an argument that it's a $50 or $100 trillion market if you tried to, estimate it correctly today as a global phenomenon. Now, if this is actually something 10 times bigger than the internet, that would make it 500 trillion plus. So we're an industry that's under $1 trillion today. Yeah, we're going to see ups and downs, and we could see massive crashes tomorrow. But looking at it on that same relative basis, it's an interesting data point anyway. I like talking about this concept of going from A to Z, and we have had businesses, corporations, and the mega corporation or big business really is the byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. We need to create these vehicles to finance the build out of the Industrial Revolution, and this is kind of the thing that began the enslavement of man, the beginning of turning us into robots and eventually batteries for the machines. The reason for that is prior to that, over 90% of the world's population were entrepreneurs. We were craftsmen, we were masters of our crafts. And what's happened is we've been bouncing around now in pursuit of money, taking on jobs that we don't even love because it's going to pay us. And it's kind of creating a bit of a miserable life. But you fast forward a little further, and we are where we are today. I'd like to talk about this, which is that money is no longer going to be power. there's a paradigm shift occurring, and that is that the future is going to be that technology is power, consciousness is power, community is power. And when you're building things in this space, it's always about building community, because we're going from businesses to communities. You know, a business is a sociopathic entity. If you think of life and the world we live in today, and you think of it as a game, and you look at the rules of the game, you're born, and is your power meter at full, half? You know, is it over? Do you have any special power-ups? And we all do in certain ways. And, you know, the most powerful trait you could be born with in the game or the world and the rules that we have today is to be a sociopath. If the game is to accumulate resources like money. That's why so many people in positions of power often have that, because they lack empathy that gives them an advantage over most of us. And corporations are just networks of that. You know, they lack empathy. And so the corporation is what's given us many of the great things that we have here, leading from the Industrial Revolution to today. But like all systems, you know, they eventually stop serving their originally intended purpose. And then in a Darwinian sort of way, all it does is try to survive. And at some point, systems need to evolve and be upgraded, preferably in partnership with the incumbents. So the future is no longer about building businesses, it's about building communities. The success of your project is dependent upon your community. I like this video.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers, because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
Yeah, but that video is, I think, probably one of the best blueprints to teaching you what, you know, the world is going to be like. I also like to talk to people about this concept because I believe, you know, we all have the potential to be superheroes and have superpowers, and all I mean by that is that you've got skills, you know, unique skills that you've chosen to refine over the course of your life. And so I often get, you know, pitched by entrepreneurs at events, and I like to explain to them that, you know, if the world is a game, at least from, you know, take that perspective in this instance, you know, I'm the game master of my game. And if you want to pitch me let me just tell you a couple of things, in terms of the rules, the basics, and a couple of clues on how to get what you want out of me. For one, don't ever come up and say, hey, here's this idea, or look at how much money we can make. I'm not interested in making money. And I'm not interested in hearing about your ideas about making money, at least not as a starting point. That's like walking up to someone and trying to sell them a watch on the street. Not the right first impression. If it were a game, it's like starting out in Flappy Birds and hitting the button once and being dead. Develop a human connection. Figure out a way to connect with someone before you start selling them something. Don't ask them, what do you do? I mean, that's basically saying, I'm trying to quickly evaluate whether or not you have something to offer me. The goal should be figuring out what you have to offer them. And so, try to figure out a way to, create an engagement. If you've been to Burning Man, tell me you're a burner, like you skipped to level 10. Whatever it is, and if you don't know what to say, this is what I always say, is just tell me what your superpower is. And then tell me how you're applying that superpower to make the world a better place. And if we're still talking about it, then tell me what the application is, the project that you're working on right now to apply those things. That's what matters, because 9 out of 10 projects are going to fail in the first 3 years statistically. So your projects too are most likely going to fail. But that's not what it's about. It's about the mission and where you're going, because it might not be your first project that succeeds, it might be your second or third. And if I like what your purpose is, I'm hopefully there to ride it out with you, as long as your failures were done, thoughtfully and ethically. So you're all superheroes and superpowers. I think our role in life, and especially if you're new to this industry, is not to figure out what people can do for you, but to figure out what you can do for them. Pay it forward, gifting, and in the process, if you don't have deep knowledge, find the most talented people that inspire you, and then figure out how you can help them. And it doesn't need to be a big commitment. It can be a very small commitment to start. You don't need to make a big commitment to people you don't know very well, but figure out how to help them. If you're a super connector, whatever it is, find little ways to help. And in the process, you're going to learn a lot from the best people. And you're going to learn which people you want to follow and support, or they might come follow you on something, and you collaborate and do things together. But through that process is the way that you're going to learn best, and you're going to get access to the best information and the best people. If you're new to an industry, it's, you got to pay tuition, it's interning. None of us are above that. And giving is like the greatest gift there is. I like talking about this too, because I think that, if the world that we live in is a game, and the goal is about, accumulating money and getting the Forbes 400 list, and the goal then is to keep that money so you can aspire higher in the list. I mean, right now, Richard Branson is going to fall off the list because he's been giving it all away. So he's no longer worthy, to be, on the scoreboard because he did the right thing, if that's what people care about. So my definition of a billionaire is someone that doesn't have $1 billion, but someone that has actually positively impacted the lives of 1 billion people. A unicorn is a community of people that are positively impacting the lives of, 1 billion people. The trillionaire is someone that's positively impacting the lives of 1 trillion living things. Let's change the score. Let's start evaluating, sort of things with better design, greater purpose. This is a Japanese concept which I find to be really the key to happiness. I mean, there's a bunch of them, but this one's one of the most important. And it's this concept of ikigai, which is to figure out what you're good at. I'm never going to be the best basketball player. What you are good at, what you love, what you're passionate about, and what the world needs. Get the bottom section. If you figure out what you love, what you're good at, and what the world needs, and you do those things, you find that intersection at the beginning, you've found your life's purpose. It should not be in pursuit of money. That's the big mistake people make. They make that a primary focus. Money shouldn't even be your focus, because if you get these 3 things right, I promise you, you're going to get everything you need. And more importantly, it doesn't matter if it takes you 20 years to succeed, because you're doing what you love. I find that to be, an important one. And the other thing is, our brains are forming all sorts of wonderful things when you're young, and as we get older, you have to do more and more to work at it. And try not to get trapped on level 17 or 37 in a loop, repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. You want to stay curious, kind of like a child. Keep trying and learning new things. And the way that I think about doing that is don't do it in a mediocre way. Coming out of World War II, there's that triangle of the good, fast, cheap. It can be fast and cheap, but it won't be good. So World War II, one of the big contributions from America in this case was we industrialized the military in a way that we were able to produce things fast and cheap and win in volume. Now after World War II, we exported it and just continued to commercialize this concept of fast and cheap. and then we supersized it. We stopped making things that are good. We built a world that turned it into a world of we. Kind of like if you take the M and the Y or the my out of money, you're left with one. Because we're all one. At the end of the day, one system at least. This is just some interesting stuff if you study sacred geometry. I'm going to skip forward to the chestahedron, which is the EOS logo. The chestahedron is a new sacred geometry only discovered, new geometric shape in the year 2000 by Frank Chester. Interesting that we'd lost this type of knowledge for so long and only recently discovered it. But what you'll see is when you remove the edges of the chestahedron, it produces what's called the decatria. Together, you get the exact circumference of the Earth, and the decatria coincidentally fits directly inside of the chestahedron, or the sacred geometry of the heart that encompasses the world. Anyone know what this is? How many of you have been to Burning Man? I like it. Well, this is LA. How many of you want to go to Burning Man? Oh, let's go for this too.
Let's suppose that you were able every night to dream any dream you wanted to dream. And that you could, for example, have the power within one night to dream 75 years of time. You would have every kind of pleasure you could conceive. Let's have a surprise. Let's have a dream which isn't under control. Well, something is going to happen to me that I don't know what it's going to be. Then you would get more and more adventurous, and you would make further and further out gambles as to what you would dream. And finally, you would dream where you are now.
These photos that I'm showing are from Peter, that guy standing in the center here. Wonderful photographer and friend. Burning Man is interesting. I think it's the most interesting human experiment in the world. It was certainly it's had a huge influence on my life. I like to say I'm always burning. And it's got some interesting sort of principles, but the core of it is kind of built on this concept of decentralized cultures. You know, it's decentralized systems, but in the real world, in building that kind of culture, whereas the blockchain is the technology, and I think these two things fit together quite well. And it's not to say that Burning Man is the only thing, but it's the thing that seems to be the most appropriate, at least to me. And so I encourage everybody to dream. The only limitation in life are those things that you impose on yourself, because genius is self-bestowed. Mediocrity is self-inflicted. Magic is real. Let's make some. And the chestahedron, without love, you can't ascend beyond the lower astral planes. If you care about expanding consciousness, you can't get there without love. There is no amount of meditation that can do it. The earth matters, Gaia matters a great deal. And that's why I talk about that trillionaire concept, because there's clearly not a trillion people, but there are many more than that living things on this planet that don't have a voice. And back to sort of sociopathic entities that don't really care, about the voiceless. But we should care. And I encourage everyone to believe. This was my wedding at Burning Man 2 years ago. It was an all-unicorn wedding. I'd like to talk about this. This has become kind of a primary focus of mine. I just moved to Puerto Rico with about 50 of the most talented friends I have, and I think there's another 500 on the way, because Puerto Rico needs help. They were in very, very bad shape, probably starting with in 1492. And the more you learn about Puerto Rico, the more you would be sympathetic to, a wonderful people. There are more musicians and artists there per capita than anywhere in the world. They are a beautiful people, and it is a beautiful place, and they're just in a very bad spot. And I'm not going to go through all the negative sort of reasons for why that is. But prior to the hurricane, it was horrific. It was bad, and clearly on a bad path, and no path to turn it around. And this hurricane hit, which took a very bad situation and has made it dire. I can't think of a much better cause than going and doing something about it and convincing all your friends. And then collectively, when you get a bunch of people that are really, really talented all working together, you can accomplish almost anything. And so I think we can fix Puerto Rico. I think we can go help Puerto Rico, and that's putting the Puerto Ricans first, starting with the Taino indigenous people that were there before Columbus arrived, a culture that was advanced like the Aztecs and the Mayans. And I think we can make a difference. And something that's kind of really scary with it right now is I was just there. The police haven't been paid for a month. Murder rates are rising. They were fine after the hurricane because the Puerto Rican people just kind of held it together, loved, and joined forces. But when the government couldn't afford to pay the police anymore, this is U.S. soil, by the way. The police aren't being paid, and people stop showing up to work, and those that are still doing it are now working 20-hour days, and it's falling apart. This is not something I'm talking about in the past. I'm talking to you about something that's happening right now. And there's some other interesting reasons why that is, but you can learn more about that elsewhere, I guess. I guess I'll close with, actually, if I can plug into, where am I going to get better sound, the television or here? I could probably plug an aux cable into this. I'll just play this as is. Hold on. I'm just going to do it this way. Charlie Chaplin, 77 years ago.
I'm sorry. I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world that will give men a chance to work, prosperity. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
And I'm going to have to dip out shortly after a couple of questions because I have to give another talk tonight before catching a red-eye to Miami. Thank you. Brock.ai, you can ask me questions there anytime too. For my artificial intelligence version of be smarter than I am.